All right. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to introduce who we are and what we do here at Cogist. I am Matt Can, and I'm currently part of the group that organizes our events at Cogist, which is at large an organization aiming to bring together cognitive science enthusiasts, regardless of their education level or choice of discipline. Although Cogist started out as a project to bring together like-minded individuals in Istanbul, we have rapidly grown out of the city and have members across Turkey and an outreach to the world. On the field, Cogist has been translating manuscripts, publishing original writings, organizing reading groups, summer schools, and casual get-togethers for fellow cognizers. We aim to grow even bigger into an organization where individuals who have genuine interest and curiosity about human mind and behavior to produce meaningful work in a collective manner. Although most of our efforts are in Turkish, as part of our cognitive webinar series, the event that you are all currently participating, we aim to bring our audience to the world where we invite academics and researchers to discuss about cognition. Before I leave the stage, I now wish to introduce our guest today. Professor Julia Fischer is from the University of Göttingen. She has completed her PhD at the Free University of Berlin with a dissertation on the vocal communication of macaques. She has authored more than 150 articles in reputable journals. Her monograph, Money Talk, published in 2017, presented her research to a broader audience. She has held numerous posts at the University of Pennsylvania, Max Planck Institute at Leipzig, and is currently the head of Cognitive Ethology Lab at the German Primate Center and vice president of the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Science. Dear Professor Fischer, thank you for accepting our invitation for our event, and now the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's exciting. It would be even more exciting if I could be with you in real life, of course. But the webinars are, I think, a carbon footprint-friendly way of disseminating knowledge and having the scientific exchange. So I understand that most of you here in the audience are more interested in human cognition, but I hope to convince you that we actually can gain some really interesting insights by studying animals, particularly animals like these baboons here. These are Guinea baboons. You will hear more about these fascinating animals that we study in Senegal, but also other species that we've been studying. And before I start, I want to mention the funders here. We have several organizations who have given us money to pursue this research that I'm presenting now. And of course, this is a team endeavor. Nothing of what I'm reporting today would have been possible with this absolutely wonderful team I've been able to work with over the last years. Especially the field crews are amazing people with a lot of endurance, enthusiasm, ability to walk miles in the heat and conduct, when they come home, fancy statistical analysis. So when you do cognitive science with animals in Africa, you need to have both this knack for problem solving and handling large amounts of complex data, but also the ability to not run away when there is a lion in the way. So I will call out the specific names as we go along, but suffice it to say, nothing would have happened without these people here. And so what is my overall research interest? What is sort of the guiding question? What I'd like to understand is how animals process information and how they take decisions in complex ecological and social settings. So I'm less interested in the boundaries of their cognitive abilities, when you really push them, what can they do? But I'm interested, what do they do? What is valuable to them, for instance? Which kind of interactions matter? Which information are they interested in? And what do they do with this information in the wild when they are faced with all sorts of other problems at the same time? So they have to track what everyone else is doing and where they find the food and where the next tree is that they can climb when a leopard arrives, etc. So I'm really interested in this, basically in the minds in real life, and not in necessarily in an experimental psychology tradition. Although I feel it's very important that we also look at the experimental psychology. We do this also in captivity, but today I'm going to talk about cognition in the real life. And in this way, by studying what the animals do, and what we can infer about their cognitive processes and their allocation of attention, etc. In this way, we try to understand the selective pressures operating on cognition in the wild, but also the role of evolutionary constraints that shape both communication and cognition. And ultimately, we also aim to contribute to a better understanding of the evolution of intelligence and language. And if you want to know more about what I've been doing over the last decades, then yes, this is my little advertisement here. This is the book where you can read up a little bit on what I've been doing, what my research interests were. Today, I want to focus on two examples. One is looking at baboons and investigating the link between their societies, because baboons live in different types of societies. So we also call this the sociome. So all the information we have on their social environment and how this relates to social cognition and communication. And then in the second part of this talk, I will turn to another genus, smaller monkeys, also living in sub-Saharan Africa, and look at their alarm call systems and how this may or may not inform us about the evolution of language. So in the second part, I will talk about savanna monkeys belonging to the genus Chlorocebus. Okay, so baboons. People who go to zoos, they are most likely familiar with the Hamadryas baboon because they are very gregarious. They're often found in zoos. And if I tell somebody I study baboons, then people go like, oh God, they're so ugly. But that's not necessarily true for all baboons. We think that our Guinea baboons, for instance, are not ugly. And baboons as a genus are interesting. There are 6 different species. They're not good species, so they can interbreed. There's hybridization. But nevertheless, you can sort of find these 6 typical variants of baboons. And they're interesting because they live in 2 different types of societies. Here we have the olive baboon and kinder baboon, chacma baboon, and yellow baboons. And they live in societies that are female philopatric. This means the females stay in their natal group together with their sisters, the daughters, the granddaughters, and so on. And you have these matric clans that rule the world of the savanna baboons. And then the males disperse to avoid interbreeding. And they do this in different species at different times in their lives. So in chacma baboons, which are super competitive, super despotic, males only disperse when they're really fully grown and are at the peak of their quality. And in yellow baboons, males disperse and go into another group, often already when they're adolescent. And then they go with their brother, for instance, and try to get access into a different group. And then the alpha male there isn't bothered because they're still young, so they don't pose a threat to the alpha male. So this is a unilevel, so you have stable groups, you have female philopatry, female matric clans, and then the male dispersal, and this more or less strict hierarchy among the males, a rank hierarchy. The Hamadryas baboon lives in a completely different society. So here it's called a multi-level society, and with male philopatry, so this should have been moved over here, this text. So you have these 1 male units, or units, we call them reproductive units also, with a male, and then there are 2, 3, 4 females associated with 1 particular male. Some people in the old days, they used to call this a harem also, but we now prefer the unit as a term. And several of these units form clans. And then several clans form these troops. And what is interesting here is that here the males are patrilocal. So the males stay where they are and the females transfer. So they're either taken over by a male or because when the old male dies, then another male takes them over. But here we have a completely different system in terms of the social organization and dispersal patterns. And when I started my professorship in Göttingen, I used to study Chakma baboons in Botswana in Southern Africa. And then I was asking myself, okay, I want to do field research, and where is the chart? Where are the white spots on the chart? And that was actually here in West Africa for the Guinea baboons. We knew next to nothing about Guinea baboons. People had only watched them for, a few weeks or months, but they never had done any systematic studies on their society. So we really didn't know what was going on. And that was very incentivizing. And especially after I found out that in Senegal, you get good food and the people are really friendly, and there are many, many Guinea baboons. We thought, okay, great, let's go there and set up our camp. So we founded, this is now our camp in the Niokolo-Koba National Park here in the heartland of Senegal. So when you go to Senegal, Dakar is beautiful. It's like always 24 degrees centigrade. It's always like nice breeze, etc. But then you take a car and you drive to Tambacounda, and then here it's about 48. Yeah, so it's really hot and dry and not so pretty, but we have this nice camp now. We have solar panels and a well and everything. And there are very many baboons around. And so we founded this camp or this project in 2007, and it took us about 3 years to habituate the animals so that they wouldn't run away from us. And then we could slowly start to identify the males and then the females. And so the first thing that we did to understand their cognition is we first, of course, had to understand their society. And what we found out was that the Guinea baboons, like the Hamadryas baboons, live in this multi-level social organization. So this is a social network. These are, the squares are the males and the circles are the females. And we see again that the females are associated to a specific male, that there are these secondary males also, which we call also bachelor males, because they interact with females and with other males, but they don't mate with females. Females only mate with the male with whom they're associated. And so we have these units again, and then we call these associations of units parties. And the parties, what we see there is that the male friendships make the parties. So you have 4 males or so, or 5 males, and these males are bonded, and in this way they create these parties. And then 2 parties normally form something like a gang. So this is very similar to the Hamadryas baboon, but the animals are also different from the So here, this is just a little video. So what you see here is how we define friendship, basically. Namely, we measure affiliative interactions between the animals. And what you see here is 2 males doing this grooming, social grooming. So primarily it was probably for cleaning, but it's now really the animals that groom each other are the ones that are also supporting each other in coalitions. And so you see males, adult males doing this grooming, doing this affiliative behavior. And when I first saw this coming from Chakma baboons, where Chakma baboon males only touch each other to basically bite or hit or do something like this. And then you see these male friendships, it completely blew me away. Like, why do they have these friendships? What's going on? And we know now that relatedness plays a role, so that males who are friends are also on average more highly related, but it's not deterministic. So you can also have related males that are not friends, and you can have friends that are not related. But on average, you would see a signal of relatedness driving this male tolerance. And when we look at the interactions of these males, we see that this affiliation you've just seen, like grooming, plays a huge role. And then they have rituals, male rituals, where they are touching each other's hips and touching each other's penises. So it's costly. You only do this with someone you trust. So they have lots of greetings and really very, very little aggression. So aggression is very rare in Guinea baboons. And so this would be a greeting here, 2 males. They're excited when they do this, as you can see. And we also know from a comparative study of Urs Kalbitzer, one of our PhD students in our group, that Chacma baboons, this is aggression rates of males against male targets and against female targets, that they are much more aggressive, the Chacma baboons compared to the Guinea baboons. And that there is very little male-male aggression in Guinea baboons and a little against females. So they're overall, we called them for a while the hippie baboons, yeah, because they're kind of laid back, friendly, very little aggression. And in Chacmas, it takes you about an experienced baboon researcher, it takes about a day or 2 or so until you figure out what the rank hierarchy is. But in our males, we really have a hard time figuring out who's on top and who's at the bottom. So you can tell, okay, there's somebody who's very old, he's low ranking. So this is the rank hierarchy, dominance rank here over the individuals. But the new way we are looking at ranks now is including the certainty with which we can determine rank. And you see here that there is this huge uncertainty, and that for us, we cannot decide whether this guy is more high ranking than this guy, or whether this guy is more high ranking than that guy. And in this sense, rank does not seem to play a big role. And that's, again, interesting because many of the tests that have been done to look at cognition in these animals is always finding out, for instance, whether they would track a rank reversal. Where they would understand that something has changed in their group. And we can't do this because rank is not something that is informative for this species. And then another issue that's very interesting is that the females are not objects, that they are really agents in this society, because they can choose with whom they affiliate. So what looks like an underground plan here is actually male-female association. So you have all the males here on the left-hand side, and the color codes represent different females. And here for this male Ba, for instance, he started out with 2 females, and then he gained another female, but then she left again, and then she stayed with another male. Or you see something like this guy here, DTM, he only had 1 female, but she stayed put. And then you see this clear blue one here. She's called Annika, and Annika started out with Peter and then went to Ndur and then back to Peter and then to William and then to Usman and then to Ba. And she kept changing and shopping around until she died. She essentially, I think on average, it was like every 8 months she had a new male. And then we have other couples now. I mean, now we have much more long-term data. Is, for instance, one couple called Sepp and Anne, and they've been together for 8 years now. So basically, that's his entire reproductively active period there together. He's still going strong, so we'll see whether he can clock 9 or 10 years. At some point, it's likely that Anne will switch because the males age at some point, and then the females turn to another male. And we've been investigating the predictors of male reproductive success and female choices. And this is just a little video of what's going on in these animals. So here you have this big male here, and you have a female, and here's a kill. So they eat antelope babies, and the antelope babies are cached in high grass. And it's not that they hunt them, but when they stumble upon them, they eat them alive, more or less. Sometimes then they kill them also after a while. It's pretty gruesome. But this meat is a major thing for them. And so what you will see now is a little video on her strategic thinking. So she's grooming him. And now she's presenting him, and she's actually ready to mate. So she is receptive, she's an estrus. And there she runs with the whole piece of meat, and he doesn't go after her. So we don't know whether that was really an exchange of sex, food for sex or sex for food. But it shows that these males share meat, and we are now looking at an analysis of 90 meat sharing events and like letting females steer, whether males that share food with their females actually have higher reproductive success. We don't know this. This is just the background. So really, to give you an idea, okay, now we can use this. We can use these species differences. We have the Chacma baboons on the one hand. They live in these stable groups. They have male dispersal, high aggression. They're territorial. They have consort pairs and friendships when the females are nursing the infants. And females are coerced. I mean, males are much bigger and they're very aggressive. In the Guinea baboons, we have almost, in all dimensions, the opposite. They're multi-level, female bias dispersal, male tolerance, no territoriality, male-female association, irrespective of reproductive state, and female freedom. Now, what does this do to the value of social information? That is sort of the big question. How are these differences in the societies related to social information processing and also to signaling? And there are two theoretical accounts that are relevant in this context. One has been advanced by Filippo Aureli and colleagues, and they say basically the more complex your society is, the more you need to keep track and understand what has been happening while the others weren't there. So specifically these fission fusion dynamics where the animals break up into smaller groups, like in the Guinea baboons, where you sometimes only have the units or you have the parties, but not the other party and so on. So you have to be much smarter in inferring what happened between the others while you weren't there or you didn't see them. So according to this idea, we would predict that the Guinea baboons are more attuned to, for instance, changes in the societies because they need to pick up every piece of information they can get. So they are more acute in their social information processing than the Chacma baboons. And then there is the contrasting hypothesis, the Machiavellian hypothesis advanced by Andy Whiten and Dick Byrne. And they say, no, the main driver is not the social organization, whether everybody's together all the time or not. But what's more important is how despotic a species is. Because if you live in a very despotic society and then the rank changes, for instance, in your group, you need to, it can have immediate consequences for your own survival. It can mean, there's a big new male and the big new male will start fighting everybody and then they could kill your infants. So you also need to plot, maybe you do coalitions, you need to know, okay, who has been plotting with whom against whom and will they potentially plot against me? So this kind of reasoning. And so according to the Machiavellian hypothesis, one would predict that the Chacma baboons are more attuned to changes in social settings, etc., than the Guinea baboons. And this is what we try to test. And luckily for us, these two wonderful people, Dorothy Cheney and Robert Seifert, had done lots of experimental tests in the wild to investigate the Chacma baboon social knowledge. Dorothy passed away a few years ago in 2000. But they were really shaping the field, and their book, How Monkeys See the World, is that book that made me study animal communication and cognition, actually. And then I was their postdoc in Philadelphia, and they really greatly shaped my thinking in my career. And from their work and their postdocs' work, we know that Chacma baboons respond very strongly to simulated changes in rank relations. So if you do a playback, for instance, where a lower ranking female is threatening and a higher ranking female is then screaming, which suggests to the listener there has been a rank reversal, everybody is like, what's going on? So they would look towards the speaker and be very interested in picking up on, what's going on here. They also follow breakups of consort pairs. So if you have a male and a female together, and then all of a sudden you play her calls and his calls in different locations, simulating as if they had, broken up their consort pair. Again, lots of interest. They are very sensitive to these kinds of deviations from the expected social patterns. And they also respond very strongly to simulated intruders. So for instance, if you play then the grunts of a male that is actually in a neighboring group, then the other males are again showing great interest in trying to find out what's going on. And when we started the project in Senegal, we knew, as I said, next to nothing about their society. So we started with a very simple experiment in which we tested neighbor-stranger discrimination because we still didn't know the social relationships between the animals yet. But what we could figure out is that they had these already these fission-fusion societies, and that they were sometimes hanging out with the others or were together with members of other groups. So this was a playback experiment where we played the grunts. These are sort of very frequently occurring vocalizations of the males. And we played grunts of neighboring males they would know, but not interact with frequently, and then complete strangers from 100 kilometers away. And as a control condition, we would play the calls from a male from their own group. And there were two hypotheses that we're trying to contrast. One was the dear enemy hypothesis. So if they, according to that hypothesis, you would predict that they respond much more strongly to the grunts of strangers than to neighbors, because they already know the neighbors. So they don't have a beef with the neighbors. They know the neighbors don't do anything, so it's okay. And then own group calls should not really matter. There's also the nasty neighbor hypothesis, which predicts a different pattern, namely, the problem are the neighbors. And so you should respond very strongly when there are neighbors there. But strangers don't really matter because they're maybe just passing through and you don't have an issue with them. And then you don't respond very strongly to own group again. So Peter Machi, as part of his PhD, he presented these calls to the males. And here is a video of one of such playback experiment. You can't hear the sound because it's not transmitting, but you can see very quickly the visual response. And that was in response to the onset of the call. So he's not only turning into the direction of the loudspeaker, but he's actually looking and staring and then going up and checking out the situation. So we got really nice responses. And importantly, we do these experiments or these trials not knowing which condition was played back. So you don't bias the playback according to your expectations. And then Peter did the analysis, and what we found was nothing what we had predicted. They were only interested in their own calls, in calls from their own group members, and they largely ignored both grunts from other males that were in a neighboring group or in another group or from strangers. So that was really weird to us and totally opposite to what we've seen in the Chakma baboons. Okay, but it was only one experiment and we only had 12 males. So, who knows what was going on. But there was this notion of the familiarity bias, and overall the results were in line with their low territoriality, that they don't really defend it, they don't at all defend the territoriality, and they can hang out with, not only one other gang, but with 2 other gangs or 3 other gangs, and sometimes you're surrounded by 400 baboons. Yeah? But to delve a little bit deeper into third-party knowledge, we then conceived another playback experiment where we simulated female transfers. As you may remember, I told you we have these units, we have males, associated females, And here we call them the green, the orange, and the blue unit. And the design was the following. We had a male, say from a green unit, and he heard an interaction, grunting interaction between a male and a female of the same party. And in one case, it was inconsistent. So it was, say, an orange male talking to a blue female. And in a control condition, it was consistent with the actual association pattern. So an orange male talking to an orange female. And we predicted, of course, that they would respond more strongly in the inconsistent condition. And that would show that they have some ideas or form some expectations who should be communicating with one another and who shouldn't. And again, we found that they were more interested in acoustic or communicative interactions that were consistent with the patterns. They were not so interested in deviations from the patterns. So here's another temporal resolution, if you will. So you see here that for the inconsistent, when it was deviating from the expected patterns, they were not surprised. Instead, they ignored this and were more interested here in the consistent condition when it was, say, Sepp and Anne talking to one another. And again, so we see again this confirmation bias, a greater interest in confirming existing knowledge, which is weird. Because you ask yourself, of course, how do they then find out that something has changed in their society when something has changed? We don't know. And then I thought, okay, let's try and push them a little further and give them something that should really surprise them. And so here we had a male, and he was sitting next to a big bush or a termite mound. And before the playback started, he was interacting with one of his females. And then we waited for a situation when the female walked away. And then we placed the speaker. Now we have speakers without cables, which is great. We carry around our own Wi-Fi net in the forest. And then we can just dump the speaker behind some bush relatively quickly after the female has left. That's the control condition or consistent condition. And in the critical inconsistent condition, we would play her sounds from a position where she cannot possibly be, because it's in the opposite direction and it's like 1 minute after she left. And so we thought, okay, if the male keeps track of where she went, he should be surprised to hear her call when it was coming from the other side. And then before that, we did also a control experiment on individual recognition. Are they more interested in calls of their own females compared to other unit females? And yes, that's the case. They respond more strongly when it's a unit female call than a non-unit female call. But you may not be surprised now when I tell you that in terms of being surprised that the female all of a sudden transmogrified to another place, they were not surprised. So they were overall interested. Some males even responded 14 seconds or 10 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds. So very long responses, but it had nothing to do with whether the female could possibly be there or not. And so we found no evidence that they are tracking where the female is going. They're interested in where she is, but it's not that they have obsessive compulsive disorder and sort of tracking all the time where everything that belongs to them is. Yeah. So yes, they're more interested in unit females than other females. Good, generally responsive, also good, but no evidence for tracking female movement patterns. And we may say, okay, maybe they don't have to track where the females are, because the females, once they've chosen a particular male, they mate almost exclusively with him, and over 90% of the infants are indeed sired by the primary male. So we can do these paternity tests, and we know this now. So overall, it's a really weird system where the baboons are laid back and they're more interested in something they already know. And altogether, what we can conclude is we have these two different types of baboon societies. And the value of different types of social information varies with social system characteristics. And the despotic Chacma baboons are highly attentive because changes in social relationships may have direct consequences for themselves. Whereas in the Guinea baboons, it's like, yeah, they don't have rank. It's like, doesn't matter. They don't have competition. And to us, at the moment, it's not very satisfying, but we kind of conclude that they ignore social noise. I mean, they're super gregarious. Everybody is together all the time. And social decisions aren't as costly as in the Chacma baboons. So perhaps this way they are so, who cares kind of attitude. Overall, our results are more in line with the Machiavellian hypothesis that competition matters. Yes. And so in this way, we are trying, we don't fully understand the Guinea baboons yet, but what we can say is we see species differences and they are supporting the Machiavellian hypothesis and not the fission fusion hypothesis. What's also interesting is, and that was a little bit surprising for some people, not for me so much, but so we have these different species and they live in different types of societies. How do their communication patterns differ? And we see they hardly differ at all. Yeah, we see these are spectrograms. So these are sound pictures, if you will. So here we have the frequency, you have the time, and then the different shades of black and gray are the amplitude. And so this is a bark, it sounds like ha. And this is a male bark, it's more noisy, and like sort of second syllable here. These are the grunts, sounds like this. And the Guinea baboons and the Chacma baboons, although they have these major differences in terms of their social organization, the grouping patterns, the kinds of relationships they have with one another, the signals they're using, they're completely conserved. Yeah, nothing has changed. What has changed is the attitude, is the behavioral disposition to engage either in an affiliative relationship interaction or in an aggressive interaction. But if you look at the elements of the interaction, that's not where the difference is. And so that tells us a lot about where there is plasticity in evolution. Yeah? And what we can also say that developmental constraints may also play a role, because if you have variation at the social systems level, it doesn't necessarily translate into variation in signal structure. And our results, there's a very famous hypothesis that everybody's looking at the moment, is that this link between social complexity and vocal complexity doesn't fit for the baboons. Okay, so I have taken a little bit more time. Do you still want me to go on about the communication? Yes. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, good. So the second part is about the alarm call systems in the Chlorocebus monkeys. And this is a classic paper. It's like the classic paper that is in every textbook on animal behavior. Is the study by, again, Robert Seifert and Dorothy Cheney together with Peter Mahler, and published in Science. And it's like the paper that had the most influence on the field of animal vocal communication, certainly, or primate communication. And the paper was called Monkey Responses to 3 Different Alarm Calls, Evidence of Predator Classification and Semantic Communication. And the story is the following. So you have these like cat-sized monkeys, and they are eaten by different types of predators, leopards, snakes, and eagles. And the animals have evolved different escape strategies. So when there's a leopard, they go into a tree. When there's a snake, they stand bipedally, they mob the snake. And when there's an eagle, it's safer to be in the bush, not in a tree. And they also evolved different types of alarm calls that are also recognizable for a human listener. So the typical variants are also, we can distinguish them in the field. And in this study, they did one of the first really major influential playback studies. So they played back the call, say a leopard alarm call, in the absence of a leopard, and tried to figure out, is this call enough to evoke the appropriate response? And yes, that was the case. And so they started a whole discussion about what this tells us about the similarities between animal communication systems and human communication systems. And they concluded initially that the alarm calls of vervet monkeys designate particular external reference. And the calls are arbitrary and non-iconic. Arbitrariness is accepted as one criterion for differentiating symbols from icons. So everybody got excited. Animals have words. They made it onto the front page of the New York Times. It was a huge splash, a huge media interest. And then people went like, okay, great, wait a minute. And they started thinking about it, said, hold on. Do we really have evidence for symbolic communication here? And to look at this in a little bit more detail, there are different, I mean, if you cannot talk to people and ask them what they mean, you know, or to animals, you can do other things. You can look at the variation in structure and usage of signals in different groups. You can go to different linguistic communities. You can look at different populations, or in the case of animals, different species. And you can look at signal comprehension. So both the production of the signal and the comprehension. And we did this for the vervet monkeys. So we looked at the original calls that were recorded in Kenya, and we compared them to the calls of another species of the same genus, the Chloroceles sabeus. They live also at our field station and overall here, West Africa. Green monkeys, they're called green monkeys. And these two species, they share the last common ancestor about 3.5 million years ago. And that was when we looked like this. Yeah, so we were sort of halfway between chimp and human at that time. And so to give you sort of an idea about the time depth, how far apart they've evolved in this time. And to look at their vocal production, Tabitha Price, who was also a PhD student in my group, presented these different models, a leopard model and an eagle, paper mache eagle, and a snake. The snake did not only work for the monkeys, it also worked for us. I almost always had a heart attack when I found it in one of the huts. And the animals were also impressed and gave alarm calls to the leopard and to the snake, but not the paper mache eagle. They couldn't care less about the paper mache eagle. So we had calls in response to leopards and to snakes. And then we thought, okay, but don't they ever produce aerial alarms? And then we flew a drone and we were interested in what would happen. Would they produce an alarm call that was similar to the eagle alarm of the East African monkeys, or would they come up with something completely different that nobody had heard before? Because that would give us some insight also into the flexibility of their vocal communication. So if they have any potential for conventionalized communication, they should either produce a novel sound, or different subjects would initially produce different sounds, and then subsequently they would agree on how they call the drone. But if it's largely hardwired, then the calls should be similar to the aerial alarms of the East African vervets. And this is what we found. Again, you see the spectrograms here. This is the calls from West Africa. These are the calls from East Africa. And we did huge quantitative analysis, you know, hundreds and thousands of calls. So don't worry. But I'm showing you because this illustrates. It's not just we were just looking at these spectrograms. So you see here in the spectrograms what the outcome of the quantitative analysis was. There's no difference. The calls look the same, they sound the same. If you measure them, they have the same parameter values. The leopard alarm calls, this is for females here. The leopard alarm calls are a little bit more different compared to the other two alarm calls, but overall it's the same call type. There's just a little bit longer. And the same for the males. We see, again, high similarity in the aerial alarms, slight variation in the leopard alarms, but then again, similarity in the snake alarms. And these differences in the leopard alarms actually tells us something about the sexual selection, that these calls are very loud in the males, and that so maybe there's also another component affecting the call structure. But that's a different story, not for today. So what we found was essentially the structure of the calls is hardwired. And not only the structure, but also the link between the stimulus and the response. So this is an innate pattern. They see something flying in the air they haven't seen before. They produce an aerial alarm. They cannot come up with anything else. The link is also hardwired. It's And that makes sense, actually, if you think about it. What happens, however, during ontogeny is, of course, that learning also plays a role. So if you have an infant vervet, then they give alarm calls to blackbirds and to falling leaves. And then gradually they learn to understand that only martial eagles are really dangerous. And then they ultimately only call to martial eagles. And we knew this actually since the 1980 paper, that experience shapes the categorization and evaluation of objects and events and subsequent call usage. So learning plays a role, but it's not that they have the possibility to control their vocalizations, but their experience lets them adjust to the learning outcome of understanding what's really dangerous here. So the structure of the calls is highly conserved and hardwired, very modest influence of acoustic and social experience. I mean, you can measure some, but it's not really big. Yeah, and I think this is a very interesting point, is namely, under which conditions is it actually favorable to be able to learn? But then the cost is always, if you are able to learn, you also have to learn it. And in some instances, it's actually better if you don't have to learn it, yeah, because it might be so costly that if you have to go through the learning process, it's advantageous, evolutionarily speaking, if you hardwire it, because then you get the appropriate response right away. So I think that that's a very interesting way to think about learning. And as I said, the scope of acoustic variation due to social experience is limited. There are some papers, but it never really convinces me. It has nothing to do what we do in language. It has nothing to do that we have linguistic communities, or conventionalization does not occur. There's something like accents, but nothing more. And so this is just, I don't want to go into the details here, but we try to think about what kind of learning mechanisms play a role actually here. And let me just skip this now. But maybe you want to look at this. If you're interested in vocal learning, then this is a paper you may want to check out. What is certainly important is that we are not only learning to copy the sounds of others, but we are also always taking into account to what somebody else is referring to. Where are they looking at? So the social cognition is deeply meshed with auditory learning and conceptual representation. And this is, we do have conceptual representation in the monkeys, I think, but we don't have copying, nor do we have this advanced social cognition of really being interested in what somebody else could refer to, yeah, in the sense of a shared mind or a shared intentionality that Mike Tomasello has been talking about. But if you look at comprehension, so on the production side, there are these big differences. But if you look at comprehension, this is a study almost 20 years ago now. We see that animals can learn to interpret the meaning of sounds almost limitless. Yeah? So this dog knew the names of 200 toys. And he could do rapid exclusion learning. And what we don't know is how quickly do animals actually learn sound meaning associations in the wild. So this is the final part of my talk. What we did after we had shown the drone to the green monkeys in West Africa is that we played back the sound of the drone, not in the alarm calls, but the sound of the drone after they had seen the drone 1, 2, 3 times. And the question for us was, would they check the sky once they heard the sound of the drone, because they had already learned this is something that's flying. And we were biasing against ourselves because the loudspeaker was not in the air, the loudspeaker was on the ground. And here's one video. And now it's the onset of the sound. And she starts checking, and there's nothing there. But she's gonna go on. Of course, it's weird because the sound's coming from the side. Still vigilant, checking the sky again. and checking again. And then she prefers checking again. She prefers to leave. And so it was very clear that both time vigilant and the number of lookups was much higher after we presented a drone sound compared to a control sound. Even after single exposure, the animals would respond very strongly and sort of look out what's going on. So what we see is they can learn, and they can learn very rapidly. And so what we have to do is we have to rethink what we evaluate in animal communication. And if you just have a context-specific sound, that is not a good criterion for an elaborate communication system, because it could be evolved. It could simply be a product evolution. It's highly specific, but it's not flexible. And that's what we want, actually, the flexibility. And our comparative analysis have shown that because the acoustic structure is highly conserved and there's some flexibility in usage due to experience, but what really keeps the whole system powerful is the rapid auditory learning and the inferential reasoning machine they have in their brains. And so this is what makes it looks sort of smarter altogether than it is on the side of the producers. So taken together, there is no evidence for symbolic communication, and we also know now that the animals, they can already do comprehension, inferential reasoning. That's not the bottleneck for evolving language. Yeah? So there's a lot of understanding there already, but what's missing is the ability to flexibly assign names to objects, events, concepts, etc. That's where this is human specific. Okay, so in summary, different types of societies put different premiums on social information, and we still don't know how language evolved, but we learned quite a bit about non-human primate communication and cognition, and so perhaps also have a better understanding of the sequence of events. And I hope to have convinced you about of the power of comparative analysis, and that naturalistic studies have their merits too. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Professor Fischer, for this brilliant talk. We'll now have 5 minutes of break. Okay. Meanwhile, you can prepare your questions, and we are looking forward to them in our Q&A session. Then see you in 5.
Yeah, see you in 5.
Questions. We will be recording the questions and answers as well, but if you are a shy listener or a questioner, that will be totally fine with us, and you could save your questions until the end where we start recording, or you may simply go on and then we'll just delete it out or edit it out in the end after the session has ended. Ideally, we would want you to open your microphone and camera to ask your question. But if you want to just write down in the chat, that will be also fine. So I already see a hand raising. Maya Green, if I'm not butchering your name, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me correctly? So sometimes the microphone doesn't work as well. So thank you very much for presenting your interesting work. I really like your work, and I've also read your book, of course. Well, because I'm interested in animal cognition, I'm also working on that field. And when you now presented the results of the Guinea baboon studies with what they were interested in and what they weren't so interested in, I was comparing and thinking about myself and maybe other humans, and that might also be the case for humans, right? So we would also be more interested in familiar voices than in stranger voices, and we might also be not so much, or hopefully at least, not so much watching where people go and then like track their tracks and then be surprised when they are at a spot they can't be. But I don't know so much about that. But on the social domain, I thought that this might be quite similar with humans. It would be interesting to study that with humans. I'm so sorry.
No, I mean, I think you're right. it probably also depends a lot on the context. So imagine you are in the war, in trenches, and all of a sudden there is a voice that does not belong to your group of fellow soldiers. Then you would be very interested in that information. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. It depends probably a lot on the context. And yes, we're sort of comparing the Guinea baboons a little bit like people in a mall or something. You know, there are lots of others, and it doesn't really matter who's talking to whom. You know, you're paying attention to your own group, to the animals that are very important to you. But what everyone else is doing with one another, it could just be noise. Yeah. But still, I mean, it's completely different from what the chacmas were doing. So if we had only the Guinea baboons, that would be sort of interesting. But together with the chacma baboon results, I think it's very interesting because there the pattern is the reverse.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that maybe that's not saying that they are not managing social information at all, because humans are thought at least to have very complex social cognition. Mm-hmm. And if they would react similar ways, like at least in everyday communication, then, or in everyday social interactions, then, one should maybe be a little bit more curious about why they are not interested in the other things.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that's why we're also starting this program with captive Guinea baboons. Because there we can look at some of the questions maybe we don't see in the field. Yeah? So with cognitive testing and more constrained conditions, we can look at looking time preferences. Yeah, because of course in looking time you always have this thing that if you can be interested in something either because it's novel or because it's familiar and you like it. Yeah. So distinguishing between these two explanations is not trivial, but with some experimental paradigms we may get at some more of how they would start processing changes in their environment.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Anyone else? If not, I may go ahead. Lovely, I have already a lot of questions, so I'll get to ask all of them. So I want to start a little bit general. I guess you mentioned about the importance of Guinea baboons, at least personally, that you preferred to investigate them because they are underrepresented and they seem to be quite different compared to other baboons. So I want to ask why? Why are they so unique and not male philopatric?
Yeah, that's a very good question, delving into social evolution. And nobody really knows why they are so different for sure, but we have some ideas. And what we think what happened is that the ancestral society form is the one with the female philopatry and male dispersal. And we think what happened is that at some point the demography changed so that there were so many animals together, population density was so high that it was no longer possible to defend the females in the group against other males. Because if you were fighting, with other males over access, then a third male who used a different strategy would just take over a female. So then the much more profitable strategy was to actually bond with females, to become a nice guy. Yeah? And in this way, ensure that at least you have 2 or 3 females for a longer time, that under these conditions with this high gregariousness, this is the better strategy. And then once you have something like this fixated, it has all sorts of downstream consequences, like to avoid inbreeding, you have the switch of, once the population density goes down again, you have this selective pressure that one sex has to disperse and then the females are dispersing. And males are more related, so they become more tolerant. Females are dispersing, so the female bonds are not predictive anymore for survival, unlike in the savanna baboons where it is. Yeah, so whether you have your family around actually is predictive of health and survival and reproductive success. And so we think there was this big switch, and if you switch the female-male bonding patterns, it's like a series of domino stones, that all fall, and it changes all the contingencies basically. So that's our idea, but we don't know, because we haven't been there. So we're using modeling approaches to see whether any of these assumptions are plausible. But then, of course, there are people who say, yeah, but it's usually like what you get out of it depends on what you put into it and so on. But I think at least you can test some of the assumptions. So monopolizability. So how many females do you need, and what adult sex ratio would you have where males cannot control females anymore, where fighting does not pay off anymore?
Well, I'm glad that it worked better for the Guinea baboons than in the end.
Yeah, if you ask me, I'd rather be a Guinea baboon female than a Chacma baboon female.
Can I ask something?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Do you think these mating patterns are also, how to say, the matter for people right now? I mean, because there are different cultures about marriage, or, do you think there's some parallelism like this?
I mean, well, I wouldn't say you can learn something from the Guinea baboons alone. I mean, in Senegal, there's also polygamy, where you have still some males being married to more than one woman. And when we presented the results, the Senegalese men we talked to, they were very delighted, and they said, see, it's the same thing as in our society. But we're like, no, that's not what we said. But certainly human behavioral ecology as a discipline has been looking at the ecological or economic conditions that favor different marriage and mating pattern types and child rearing types, because there is a lot of variation. I mean, there is the nuclear family, there is polygamy with one man and several women, but there are also a few rare instances in the Ladakh communities. For instance, there is one woman would marry a set of brothers. So there is huge variation, and you can relate it to inheritance patterns. But of course, in humans, it's much more complicated. So I wouldn't say that we can make direct inferences about the variation that we see in the non-human primates, but it gives us some ideas that living conditions, economic conditions play a role, but the people who studied this in non-human primates, it's not enough. So if we try to map, say, for the baboons, for instance, there's no correlation whatsoever in the ecological conditions and the social systems. You can find the Chacma baboons in the desert and in good conditions, and the Guinea baboons in the desert and in good conditions. There's no correlation. So it may explain ecological or economic condition, explain some variation, but not all of it. And so then the question is, what happened in the past and how strongly conserved this is. And I think humans overall are much more flexible. So there you can have changes in mating and marriage patterns within a few generations. And in the animals, it would be hundreds of generations.
So do you think in animals it is hardwired?
Yes and no. So in the 1960s, there was a Swiss field researcher. He studied hamadryas baboons and yellow baboons in the hybridization zone. And at that time, it was still ethically sort of acceptable to take animals. So he took females, hamadryas females to yellow baboon males and yellow baboon females to hamadryas males. And he looked what happened. And the hamadryas males are very aggressive, and they herd females and they neck bite and so on. And the females simply learned to submit. So within, a few days, they behaved like hamadryas baboon females. Whereas the hamadryas baboon females in the yellow baboon society were like, oh, cool, nobody's biting me anymore. I can do what I want. So learning also always plays a role in, in the expression of social behavior. But I would say the general disposition is, like all else being equal, I would say the general disposition of Guinea baboon males is not to be aggressive, be nice to the kids, they don't kill the babies. Whereas Chacma baboon males, their general disposition, both for the males and the females, is that they're really nasty. That I would say is indeed hardwired, and we tried to look at the genetic. We looked at some candidate genes tied to aggression, but that's too simplistic. I mean, there are whole gene networks that play a role in regulating aggression, and we didn't have the tools at that time to do these more complex analysis.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for the question. I don't see any other hands, so I will proceed to ask my question again. I hope I can formulate this. There was one plot that you showed, and it was on the looking times of the baboons when the sounds were consistent or inconsistent. And in that plot, I also saw a huge variation for the interest to their own group. And I was wondering if you could level this up and ask if there's an indication that these interests are explained by the individuals rather than the group interest. I'm asking this because I'm also wondering, this is a second level to the question, that whether there are any social disappointments among the male baboons. Perhaps they're more interested in tracking some females, but not the others.
Sure.
So are there other mechanisms that these cognitive capacities of the baboons are reflected in other ways?
Yeah. I mean, I did not say, quite deliberately so, I did not say they cannot do it. I did not say they are unable. I said they did not show any signs. We found no obvious evidence that they were surprised. Yeah. So we don't know. Maybe they were even surprised, but we're not showing it. Yeah. So that's the problem, of course, if you can't ask them. There is huge variation. It may be driven by the individuals. So some individuals are more consistently responsive because it was a paired, repeated measurement design. So everybody was tested in both conditions. So some animals are consistently more responsive than others, but there's also, of course, the day. So you test them, maybe at 11 in the morning, you did not know whether there was a leopard at night. And so there's also environmental variation. Maybe they had a bad night, maybe they had seen a predator, maybe, whatever, they just had a fight, an hour earlier, but you were not aware of this. So that's the normal horror of sort of these kinds of field data. There is this huge variation always. But I've done also many player studies where we had actually clear results. I mean, like the drone study, this would be an example. Yes, you can get, you can see effects if they're strong enough, you can see it. But of course, it could be that, maybe the experiment would have been different if we had played back the sounds of the females while she was in estrus. So ready to mate, maybe that would have increased the value of that information. So that these are the things that we are now pursuing in further studies.
Lovely. Anyone? Any questions? Dilara, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I cannot open my webcam right now, but I can ask my question directly. It's going to be a general question, I think, but do you think that baboons actually have a mind, or do they their behaviors are do their behaviors in an instinct way or automatically, you can say, or do they really have a mind?
Both. Depends on what you look at. I think for instance, a female that gives birth for the first time, she knows what she needs to do, but she does it in a clumsy way. She knows she needs to pick up the baby and carry it around. She knows that, sorry, let me just drink. So this is where I would say it's the instinct. They don't have, I mean, they also have this, if you say, instinct to groom. So once they're maybe a year old or so, they will start grooming others. And it looks weird, but they do it, and they have sort of dispositions, but then also learning plays a role. It's always an interaction of the social opportunity, the social experience, and then a certain disposition. So, and then they certainly have a mind. I mean, for instance, I mean, this is like an anecdote, but still they know me, although I only go there every year for a week. No, not for a week, for a month. Yeah. And then I'm gone for 11 months, and then I come back and they treat me like somebody they know, because they clearly distinguish between people they know and people they don't know. So they have very good memory. They have excellent memory for everybody they know. And then they have been also involved in lots of cognitive testing, and they are able to do all sorts of inferences, and they have memory. I would say, yes, they have a mind. Maybe they don't know that they have one. Yeah. And they all know each other much better than we do. So most of what baboons are doing all day is watching the others. So they're super interested in everybody, you know, every interaction, and generally they're very interested, and they know what's going on.
Thank you so much for your answer. Yeah, you convinced me with your answer. Thank you.
I think their complex society shows that they attribute minds to others. So I don't think it's possible they don't aware that they have one. I feel like.
Yeah, but maybe not, you know. If I'm interested in always is like, how far do you get with the minimal assumptions? And if you look at the communication system, you can make minimal assumptions and you still have a very complex communication system. And you could, I think, explain most of what they're doing is with a very good understanding of what the others are doing, not necessarily what they're thinking. So if you simply observe the others, and then you can learn, for instance, what they're up to. Yeah, because you can make predictions through statistical learning. Say, okay, if he looks like this now, probably the next thing that's going to happen is that. And so for this, you don't really have to represent the mind. You can represent the animal as such, as a behaving agent. And
this is also what we are doing, exactly.
Exactly. I think we are overestimating our own attribution of mind. Yeah, I think we are thinking a lot that we are thinking about other minds, but we're actually thinking about others' behaviors.
Yeah, exactly.
And unless we're in the puberty, in adolescence, where you're constantly fretting about what others are thinking. Yeah, but generally we use, I think, behavioral observations much more than we think we do.
Yeah, it's also very amusing to think that the baboons may have the attributes that we might have. So it's, I guess it's a human trait as well.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you know, you have these two minds. Like I have two minds when I'm with them. You know, one is my scientific mind. It goes like, we have to be neutral. You know, we don't belong to this group. We keep our distance. We do not interact. Of course, we do not feed them. We don't do this. You know, we are like walking trees or something. You know, and then of course we are not. Yeah, because they know us, and now they've started doing things like greeting, you know, so you stand there and then a baboon comes and grunts to you, or a baboon comes and does a tail flick, which is sort of a hey guy, you know, sort of a high five for baboons. Yeah, it's a tail flick, and you stand there and they go like bam, and it's like fuck, baboon just gave me a tail flick. And then that makes you happy, you know, somehow, because you broke that boundary. But on the other hand, your science mind says, oh my God, we have to stop our observations. So yeah, it's mixed, but it's great also. Yeah.
Did you say you don't feed them?
No, we don't feed them.
You don't help them in any way, right?
Sorry, in?
You don't help them in any way.
No medical things. I mean, we did some experiments now about their, say, the value of a male, if we make them a specialist in problem solving, and the problem solving actually leads to access to food. So in this sense, we're feeding them, but it's not that we're giving them food. We put an experimental device, and if they are successful, they get food out of it. And they will know that we put it there. You know, they know this, of course.
But it is not an amount that they can that would be enough for a day, right? It is just a small amount of gift, like.
No, in one of the experiments we gave them a bonanza of peanuts because the question was it needed to be shareable high value food. So we have one male, he can open a box and that food is distributed so that many baboons can eat from it. And then the question was, will he become more popular? Yeah. But we don't have the results yet fully analyzed, but it looks very interesting, I can say.
Well, while we are at it, I would also want to ask a very general question. I'm personally interested in how of science as well as what of science. So I want to ask, what are the difficulties and constraints in data collection in the wild, and how could those difficulties be overcome?
Okay, well, there are very many difficulties. I mean, one is that our sample sizes are always dismal. And with the replication crisis and our greater awareness of how important decent sample sizes are, I mean, if I do a power analysis and that tells me you need to test 400 baboons, there aren't 400 baboons, I can't test, and it will take me, 4 years or so. So we're basically, I sometimes say to my students, especially with the experiments, like we don't need to do statistical testing here. It's not more informative than looking at the data because we, have loads of false positives and false negatives. It's a huge problem. The other is more practical. How do we ensure observer reliability? So we have very long training periods. So anybody who works with us has to undergo about 3 months of very intense training and lots of quality checks. So we do these then parallel observations, and you need to reach a certain criterion. And so we do a lot to ensure data quality because it's a long-term project, right? We now have data since 2010, except with the COVID hiatus, but it's. So there are ways you can deal with this, to improve the data quality. But yeah, and then you have these things like, the park's flooded, everybody has to be evacuated. Or all of a sudden we had this one group, the 9, we called them the 9. The 9 group we had the longest data for the 9 group. So we knew everybody since 2010. And we were very proud to be able to track the long-term fate. And then all of a sudden the 9 split and half of the group moved to some other area. And they were just gone. I mean, and we searched for 2 months and ultimately we found them again, but they're in an area where we can't do research. So these things, it's like, it's just like nothing you can, you expect at the beginning, but it happens. So, and you can't do anything about it. I mean, you just have to, plow on and take the other groups. So yeah. But I would, if you would offer me the opportunity again to study them or other primates, I would always say yes, because it's a very rich life, with the intercultural communication things, and then getting out of. The worst was when we have internet, we have satellite dish and everything, and we have also Zoom in the camp. I hate it because before it was always so great to get out, and really like walk 6 hours in the morning with the baboons and think, and then go home and write down ideas for research and not be in this treadmill. And so I love it. Yeah.
And
I'm really happy.
We are happy to hear that. We are glad that you do what you do. Lovely. Is there any other questions? If not, then that would be it for today. Professor Fischer, thank you for your attendance. And thanks everyone for your participation and for your questions. It was a lovely event. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you too, and have a great evening. And I'll go to dinner now. And thanks for the questions and for the invitation. Bye.
Lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye.